before I build a shed, I need to build this. I've been needing a shed in this backyard for a while, and this corner is where it's going. But before I can build a shed, I gotta get a solid base down first. In this video, I'm clearing the area, laying out the supports, and building the floor that the shed is going to sit on. Right here, I'm getting started by clearing out the spot where the shed base is going to sit. I've got my wheelbarrow out and the materials nearby. I'm basically trying to turn this patch of grass and dirt into a flat enough area to build on. Since this is going back by the fence, I want to use the space without taking up more of the yard than I have to. The ground definitely isn't perfect, so I'm just trying to get it cleaned up and level enough so the blocks and frame have a decent place to sit. Now, this part's kind of boring, so I'm going to go ahead and just speed this up for you. At this point, I'm raking the area out and trying to get the ground as level as I can. I'm pulling the dirt around, knocking down the high spots, and filling in some of the lower spots so the shed base has a better place to sit. And yeah, that white fence back there has definitely seen better days. It's kind of an eyesore right now, and eventually I want to change it over to a vinyl fence, but for now, that's part of the reason I wanted to use this corner for the shed. Once the shed is up, it should help cover some of that up and make this side of the yard a lot cleaner. Once I get the ground close, I go back over it and tamp it down. That helps pack the dirt tighter so it's not loose underneath the blocks. It's not the most exciting part of the build, but it's one of those steps that matter because if the ground keeps shifting underneath, the base can end up moving. Now I'm starting to lay out the pavers where I want the shed base to sit. These are going to be support points underneath the frame, so I'm spacing them out across the area instead of just putting the wood straight on the ground. At first, I'm just getting the layout close. I want to see where each paver needs to land before I start setting them in for real. Once I have them roughly where I want them, I go back over each one and do it the right way. I lift the paver back up, put some paver gravel underneath it, spread it out, and then tamp it down. That gravel gives a paver a better base to sit on, instead of just sitting directly on the loose dirt. It also gives me a little bit of room to adjust each one, so if a block is sitting too low or too high, I can add or move some gravel around until it looks better. Then I set the paver back in place, check it, move on to the next one. This part is definitely repetitive, but it's one of those steps that's worth doing right. Each paver is basically becoming its own little footing for the floor frame. So once the shed is built, the weight isn't sitting in one spot, and the wood isn't sitting directly on the ground. It takes a little extra time now, but it should help keep the base more. After the pavers are set, I add the deck blocks on top. Those blocks are what the framing wood is going to sit in, so I'm placing them where the main boards need support. Once those are in place, I start bringing over the lumber and laying out the floor frame. This is where I can finally see the actual size of the shed base. I'm setting the boards in place, getting the joists laid out, and making sure everything is sitting in the deck blocks the way it should. At this point, I'm not really building it one piece at a time like a wall or something. I'm getting the whole floor frame arranged first, so I can see how everything lines up before I start locking it all. Now that the frame is laid out, I'm working around it and getting everything lined up. I'm checking the spacing, making sure the boards are sitting where they need to be, and making sure the supports are under the right spots. This part is a lot of small adjustments. Move a board a little, check the block underneath it, straighten it out, and then keep going. It might not look like much is changing, but this is where I'm trying to get the base sitting right before I start locking everything together. I want the floor to feel solid once the plywood goes on, so I'm taking a little time here to make sure the frame isn't twisted or sitting weird on the blocks. Before I fasten everything down, I also check that the frame is square. I measure from corner to corner, and if both measurements match, I know it's lined up. If they're off, I just shift the frame a little until it sits right. Once the frame is squared up, I go ahead and fasten the main frame down so it doesn't move around on me. I wanted to get the shape locked in first before I started adding anything else to it. After that, I start putting in some extra support beams for the floor. This might be a little overkill, but I'd rather have too much support than not enough. Since this is going to be the floor of the shed, I don't want it feeling weak or bouncy later on. So I'm adding these extra boards through the middle to help carry the plywood and spread the weight out better. It gives the floor more structure, and it should help everything feel more solid once the shed is actually built on top of it. From here, I'm getting those inner support beams squared up and locked in. I'm making sure they're sitting straight, lined up with the rest of the frame, and spaced out the way I want them. Since these boards are going to support the plywood from underneath, I don't want them loose or sitting crooked. I'm taking a little extra time here to get them secured, because once the floor is covered up, those supports are what help keep everything feeling solid. It's one of those parts you won't really see once the shed is finished, but you'll definitely notice if the floor feels weak later. Once the frame is built out, I start putting some of the dirt back in around the area. This is dirt I had taken out earlier when I was trying to get everything level, so now I'm using it to fill in some of the lower spots around the base. I'm not trying to bury anything or cover the frame up too much. I'm just trying to smooth the ground out and fill in the gaps around the pavers and deck blocks. I also don't want rainwater getting under there and washing out the paver gravel I just put down. If that gravel starts moving around later, then the blocks could settle or shift, and that's the last thing I want after the shed is already built. So I'm spreading the dirt back in those spots, packing it in a little, and trying to make the ground around the base look more even. It's another one of those small steps that probably won't stand out in the finished project, but it should help keep everything more solid over time. Now I'm rinsing everything down around the base. This helps clean up some of the loose dirt, but it also helps the dirt settle in around the pavers and blocks. Since I just filled some of that dirt back in, I wanted to pack in a little better instead of staying loose on top. You can see the frame is already in place, so this is pretty much the last bit of prep before the plywood goes on. I'm just making sure the area around the base is cleaned up, settled in, and ready before I cover the frame. Projects like this can be a little intimidating when you first start. Anytime you take on something bigger than what you're used to, there's always that part of you wondering if you're doing it right or if you're going to mess something up. But I think that's kind of the point. You don't really grow by only doing the things you're already comfortable with. Sometimes you just have to start, figure it out as you go, and trust that each step is teaching you something. Even if it's not perfect, you're still learning, and you're still getting better. This shed build is definitely pushing me a little bit, but that's also what makes it worth doing. By the time it's finished, I'll not only have a shed, I have the experience from actually building it myself. Now the plywood is on top, and this is the part where it finally starts looking like a real floor. I'm going around with the drill and getting it fastened down to the frame underneath. I also used a few clamps to hold the plywood in place while I worked. That way it wouldn't shift around on me while I was trying to line it up and screw it down. I'm making sure the edges are tight, the corners are secure, and the plywood isn't moving around on me. Since the shed is going right on top of this, I want the floor locked in pretty good. I also went ahead and used waterproof sealer on the plywood. Since this is outside, I wanted to give it some extra protection from moisture before I built the shed on top of it. I'm not just throwing a couple screws in and calling it done. I'm working my way around the sheet and making sure it's attached all the way across the frame. The plywood is what ties the whole base together, so once this is screwed down, everything starts feeling like one solid piece instead of just a bunch of boards sitting on blocks. This is also why I added those extra support beams earlier. When I walk on this floor, I don't want to feel soft spots or any bounce in the middle. I'd rather spend a little more time now and put in a few extra screws than have the floor feel weak later after the shed is already built. At this point, I'm just making my way around the platform, checking the spots that need to be secure, and making sure the plywood is pulled tight down to the frame. It's a simple step, but it's what finishes off the whole base. Once the floor is locked in, the foundation is basically ready for the shed walls to go up. At this point, the base is pretty much done. What started as a rough little section of the yard is now a raised platform sitting on blocks, ready for the shed. It might not be the most exciting part of the build, but it's definitely one of the most important. I got the area cleared, laid out the pavers, added the deck blocks, built the frame, sealed the plywood, and got the floor locked down. That's going to wrap up part 1 of the shed build. In part 2, I'll be building the actual shed on top of this base. So stick around if you want to see the whole thing come together.